The people who break your heart are not always the ones who hate you. Sometimes they are the ones who simply stop seeing you. Ethan Brooks stood quietly at the edge of the crowded family barbecue, holding a paper plate that had long gone cold in his hands. Around him, laughter drifted across the backyard. Children chased one another between folding tables. Music played softly from a portable speaker near the patio. It looked like a perfect summer afternoon in suburban Seattle. But Ethan felt invisible. Not because anyone was openly cruel. Not because anyone shouted at him. The truth was far simpler. Nobody seemed to notice he was there. Near the center of the gathering, his twin brother Noah sat alone beneath a maple tree. While the rest of the family laughed and shared stories, Noah stared down at a glass of lemonade he barely touched. Every few minutes someone would glance his way, only to look elsewhere again. Noah had spent most of his life existing on the outside of every room he entered. He had struggled with setbacks that others judged without understanding. Failed business ventures. Financial problems. Years of being labeled the disappointment of the family. Ethan knew the story better than anyone. They had shared a childhood. Shared birthdays. Shared dreams. Yet somehow life had carried them in very different directions. There he is. Ethan turned as one of his uncles approached. For a brief second, he thought the greeting was meant for him. It was not. The man walked straight past Ethan toward another relative standing behind him. Ethan smiled politely and stepped aside. Nobody noticed. Across the yard, Noah finally stood and headed toward the driveway. His shoulders were slightly hunched. His expression carried the exhaustion of someone who expected rejection before it happened. Ethan watched him leave. Something tightened in his chest. 5 minutes later, he found Noah sitting alone on the tailgate of an old pickup truck parked along the curb. The evening sun cast long shadows across the quiet street. "You disappeared." Noah laughed softly. Nobody noticed. Ethan sat beside him. For a while neither spoke. The silence between them felt familiar. Comfortable. "They mean well," Ethan finally said. Noah smiled without humor. "That is what people always say." A breeze rustled through the trees overhead. Families continued laughing in the backyard behind them. Noah looked toward the house. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to be somebody people are happy to see?" Ethan frowned. "Noah, I am serious." His brother's voice remained calm. "When I walk into a room, people see problems. Debts. Mistakes. Failures. They never see me." Ethan stared at the pavement. Because the hardest part was knowing Noah was right. Back at the house, another burst of laughter erupted from the patio. Ethan recognized the sound immediately. Claire. His wife. She stood among friends near the outdoor kitchen, smiling at a conversation he had not been invited into. She looked beautiful in the golden evening light. Confident. Effortlessly charming. Ethan loved her deeply. Yet lately, he often felt like a guest in his own marriage. Not disliked. Simply overlooked. Claire glanced briefly in his direction. Their eyes met for less than a second before someone beside her spoke and pulled her attention away. Ethan looked down. No one noticed. "She does not see you either, does she?" Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. The silence said enough. As twilight settled across the neighborhood, neither brother realized that this ordinary evening would become the last normal day either of them would have for a very long time. The next morning began the same way most mornings did in the Brooks household. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows. Coffee brewed quietly on the counter. The neighborhood outside stirred to life as commuters backed out of driveways and school buses rolled through the streets. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen preparing breakfast. He moved through the routine effortlessly. Eggs for Claire. Whole wheat toast because she preferred it. Fresh berries arranged carefully beside her plate. Small details remembered without effort because he had spent years paying attention. Upstairs, the shower turned off. A few minutes later, Claire entered the kitchen dressed for work, scrolling through emails on her phone. Ethan placed her coffee beside her exactly the way she liked it. 1 teaspoon of sugar. A splash of cream. She reached for the cup without looking up. "Thanks," she said automatically. The word sounded more like habit than appreciation. Ethan sat across from her. Claire continued reading messages. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just empty. Eventually, she glanced toward him. Do not forget dinner with the Andersons tonight. Ethan nodded. I already made the reservation. Claire returned her attention to the screen. Good. A few seconds later, her phone vibrated. A smile appeared on her face. A genuine one. Ethan watched as she typed a quick response and laughed softly at whatever message she had received. He realized he had not seen that smile directed toward him in a very long time. The thought lingered long after she left for work. Later that afternoon, Ethan stopped by Noah's apartment. The building stood on the older side of town, far from the polished neighborhoods where most of their relatives lived. Noah opened the door carrying a half-packed duffel bag. Ethan immediately noticed the boxes stacked near the wall. You are moving? Noah shrugged. Something like that. The answer felt incomplete. Inside the apartment, everything looked temporary. Drawers emptied. Shelves bare. Even the framed photographs had been taken down. Ethan frowned. What is going on? Noah stared out the window for several seconds before answering. Have you ever wanted to disappear for a while? Ethan sat down slowly. That sounds serious. Noah laughed quietly. Maybe I am just tired. The room fell silent. Finally, Noah reached into his pocket and handed Ethan a folded envelope. If anyone asks where I went, do not give them this until tomorrow. Ethan looked at the envelope but did not open it. Noah, promise me. Something in his brother's voice made Ethan pause. It was not fear. It was resignation. The kind that comes after carrying disappointment for too long. Ethan nodded. I promise. Relief crossed Noah's face. For the first time all day, he smiled. A real smile. As evening approached, Ethan returned home. Claire was already dressed for dinner. Elegant. Polished. Beautiful as always. Yet when she looked at him, her expression remained distant. You are late, she said. Ethan apologized even though he had arrived only 5 minutes after her. Claire picked up her purse and headed for the door. As Ethan followed, his phone vibrated. A message from Noah appeared on the screen. It contained only 7 words. Thank you for always seeing me, brother. Ethan stopped walking. A strange feeling settled in his chest. For reasons he could not explain, those words felt less like a message and more like a goodbye. Dinner with the Andersons should have felt ordinary. The restaurant overlooked Elliott Bay, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the lights of Seattle as evening settled across the water. Conversations drifted through the dining room. Glasses clinked softly. Waiters moved between tables with practiced ease. Yet from the moment Ethan and Claire sat down, he could not stop thinking about Noah's message. Thank you for always seeing me, brother. The words replayed in his mind again and again. Across the table, Claire laughed at something Mr. Anderson said. Ethan smiled politely, though he had missed most of the conversation. Nobody seemed to notice. By the time dessert arrived, his phone had vibrated 3 times. Each time he glanced at the screen, he found no new messages. No calls. Nothing from Noah. A strange uneasiness settled deeper into his chest. When dinner finally ended, Claire lingered outside the restaurant speaking with friends while Ethan stepped toward the parking lot. The cool evening air carried the scent of salt water from the bay. He pulled the folded envelope from his jacket pocket. Noah had asked him to wait until tomorrow. Ethan looked at his watch. It was nearly midnight. For several seconds, he stared at the envelope. Then he carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Ethan immediately recognized Noah's handwriting. If you are reading this, I have already left Seattle. Do not worry. I am safe. I simply need distance from a life that no longer feels like mine. Ethan continued reading. Noah explained that he had accepted a temporary position managing a remote property in northern Montana. The opportunity had appeared unexpectedly. No family obligations. No social expectations. No reminders of every mistake people believed defined him. At the bottom of the page, one sentence stood apart from the others. There is one favor I need from you. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. The request was simple. Noah had committed to overseeing an important charity fundraising event scheduled for the following weekend. Hundreds of donors would attend. Contracts had already been signed. Sponsors expected him there. Backing out would damage relationships he had spent months trying to rebuild. Noah wanted Ethan to attend in his place. Ethan laughed softly in disbelief. Identical twins shared the same face, but not the same life. Yet as he stood beneath the parking lot lights, the request somehow felt exactly like something Noah would ask. The next morning, Ethan drove to Noah's apartment. It was empty. Completely empty. The boxes were gone. The furniture had disappeared. Even the old coffee mug Noah always left beside the sink was nowhere to be found. Only silence remained. By afternoon, Ethan sat in Noah's former chair at a small office overlooking downtown Seattle. Files were stacked neatly across the desk. Donor lists, event schedules, sponsorship agreements. Noah had left detailed notes about everything. Ethan spent hours reading through them. The more he learned, the more he realized how much effort his brother had invested into rebuilding his reputation. Most people never saw that side of Noah. They only saw failures. They never saw the quiet determination underneath. Later that evening, Ethan returned home carrying one of Noah's folders. Claire sat in the living room reviewing work documents. She barely looked up when he entered. "How was your day?" Ethan asked. "Busy." She turned another page. "Yours?" Ethan paused. For the first time in years, he considered telling her everything. About Noah. About the letter. About the strange favor he had agreed to perform. But before he could speak, Claire's phone rang. She immediately answered. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. By the time she finished, the moment was gone. Ethan quietly carried the folder upstairs. As he sat alone in the guest room reviewing Noah's notes, one realization slowly emerged. In 4 days, he would walk into a room filled with strangers pretending to be his brother. Neither of them understood yet that the decision would change far more than a single weekend. For days later, Ethan stood in front of a floor-length mirror inside a luxury hotel overlooking downtown Seattle. The reflection staring back at him looked exactly like Noah. Of course it did. They had shared the same face since birth. Yet as he adjusted the cuff of his jacket, the difference felt larger than ever. Noah carried years of disappointment on his shoulders. Ethan carried years of quiet responsibility. The world saw identical twins. The people who knew them best understood they could not have been more different. The charity gala occupied the hotel's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings. Hundreds of guests filled the room. Business leaders, donors, community advocates, and local officials moved between elegantly decorated tables. Ethan had spent the previous days studying Noah's notes until midnight each evening. Names, histories, conversations. He wanted to honor the trust his brother had placed in him. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet from the moment he entered the ballroom, something unexpected happened. People smiled when they approached him. They greeted him warmly. Several thanked him for his recent work with local community programs. Others praised ideas Noah had spent months developing. Ethan listened carefully and responded with genuine interest. He remembered details, asked thoughtful questions, focused entirely on the person standing in front of him. By the end of the first hour, conversations flowed naturally. For perhaps the first time in Noah's life, people were seeing the best version of him. Across the room, a woman named Charlotte Dawson paused during a conversation and watched him from a distance. She had worked with Noah on multiple fundraising projects. When she finally approached, her expression revealed confusion. "You seem different tonight." Ethan smiled politely. "Different how?" Charlotte studied him carefully. "More relaxed." She shook her head. "Actually, that is not it." Ethan waited. "You are listening." The comment surprised him. Charlotte laughed softly. "Usually when people talk, they are already thinking about what they want to say next. Tonight you are actually listening." Ethan glanced down briefly. Nobody had ever complimented him for something so ordinary. Yet somehow the words stayed with him. Hours later, back in Seattle, Claire sat alone in the living room. The house felt unusually quiet. She reviewed reports for work but struggled to concentrate. Eventually, she noticed Ethan's favorite reading chair near the window. Empty. She frowned slightly. Over the past few days, he had seemed distracted, distant, not angry, just somewhere else. The realization unsettled her more than she expected. Claire picked up her phone and considered calling him. Then she stopped. For years, she had assumed Ethan would always be there, always available, always patient. The thought had become so automatic she rarely questioned it. Meanwhile, at the gala, Ethan stood near a balcony overlooking the city lights. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The evening had gone better than expected. Noah would be proud. A voice interrupted his thoughts. There you are. Ethan turned. Charlotte approached carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed one to him. The board wants you to speak before the final donation announcement. Ethan nearly laughed. That was definitely not in Noah's notes. Charlotte smiled. Trust me, they are impressed. Ethan looked out across the ballroom. Hundreds of people filled the room below. None of them realized they were looking at the wrong brother. Yet for the first time in years, Ethan felt something he had not experienced in a very long while. He felt seen. And somewhere deep inside, a realization quietly began to form. Sometimes people become different not because they change who they are, but because someone finally notices who they have been all along. The charity gala ended with a record-breaking donation total. Long after the final speeches concluded and the last guests departed, Ethan remained standing near the ballroom windows, overlooking the city. Seattle glittered beneath the night sky. Ferries moved across the dark water in the distance. The evening should have felt like a success for Noah. In many ways, it was. Yet Ethan could not stop thinking about the conversations he had experienced throughout the night. People had shared ideas with him, asked for his opinion, thanked him for his work. They had spoken to him as though his thoughts mattered. The feeling was unfamiliar. Back home, he often felt like background noise in his own life. The next morning, Claire sat at the kitchen table reviewing a presentation while Ethan prepared breakfast. The routine looked identical to every other day. Eggs, coffee, toast, fresh fruit. Yet something subtle had changed. Ethan moved with the same quiet attentiveness as always, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Claire noticed it immediately. When he placed her coffee beside her, she looked up. You seem distracted lately. Ethan smiled faintly. Do I? Claire nodded. A little. The conversation ended there. Normally, she would have returned to her work without another thought. Yet throughout the day, the observation stayed with her. Later that afternoon, Claire arrived home earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Ethan's car sat in the driveway. She found him in the backyard repairing a loose section of the wooden fence. The task itself was unremarkable. What caught her attention was the way he approached it. Patiently, carefully, without complaint. Claire stood near the patio door for a moment watching him. The fence had needed repairs for months. She had mentioned it once and forgotten about it. Ethan had remembered. Just as he remembered every maintenance appointment, every family birthday, every anniversary, every detail she no longer needed to think about because he always handled them. The realization unsettled her. Not because the qualities were new, because she suddenly understood how long she had stopped noticing them. That evening, Claire opened a kitchen cabinet searching for a recipe binder. Instead, she found a small notebook tucked behind a stack of cookbooks. Curious, she opened it. The pages contained handwritten reminders. Not work schedules. Not personal goals. Family details. Claire likes extra blankets when it rains. Favorite tea before stressful meetings. Call florist before her mother's birthday. The notes continued for page after page. Small observations collected over years. Claire sat down slowly at the kitchen table. She turned another page, then another. Every entry reflected the same thing. Attention, care, consideration. The kind of love that rarely announces itself. The kind that becomes invisible precisely because it is always there. A few minutes later, Ethan walked inside carrying a toolbox. He immediately noticed the notebook in her hands. I forgot where I left that. Claire looked up. You wrote all of this? Ethan seemed almost embarrassed. Mostly so I would not forget important things. Claire stared at him. You remember my mother's birthday every year because of a notebook? Ethan laughed softly. No. The notebook reminds me to order flowers. For reasons she could not explain, the answer lingered long after the conversation ended. That night, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside her. The house remained quiet except for the distant sound of rain beginning outside. Slowly, she realized she could not remember the last time she had truly looked at her husband. Not glanced at him. Not spoken to him. Actually seen him. And for the first time in years, that realization made it impossible to fall asleep. The following week brought a series of small moments Claire could not ignore. None of them seemed significant on their own. Together, they formed a pattern that refused to leave her thoughts. On Tuesday morning, she arrived at work to find a travel mug sitting on her desk. Her favorite coffee. Exactly the way she liked it. Attached was a note in Ethan's handwriting. Good luck with the presentation. You worked hard for it. Claire stared at the message longer than necessary. She could not remember mentioning the presentation to him. Yet somehow he had remembered. Later that afternoon, while speaking with coworkers, she found herself thinking about the notebook hidden behind the cookbooks. The pages filled with details. Tiny observations. Gathered over years. She wondered how many times Ethan had quietly paid attention while everyone else, including her, had been looking somewhere else. That evening, rain swept across Seattle. Traffic crawled through the city. By the time Claire arrived home, she was exhausted. The house smelled faintly of tomato soup and fresh bread. Ethan stood in the kitchen setting bowls on the table. Long day, he asked. Claire nodded. How did you know? Ethan smiled. You always rub your left shoulder when you are stressed. Claire froze. Without thinking, she lowered her hand from exactly where it had been resting. Ethan continued arranging dinner as though he had said nothing unusual. But Claire could not stop thinking about it. He knew that? How many other things did he notice? Over the next several days, similar moments appeared everywhere. He remembered which movie she always watched when she was sick. He knew which songs she skipped on long drives. He quietly replaced a burned-out light bulb she had complained about once 3 months earlier. None of it was dramatic. None of it looked like the grand gestures people talked about in romantic stories. Yet somehow those small acts carried more weight than anything else. One Saturday afternoon, Claire attended a charity luncheon hosted by several local organizations. The event took place at a downtown conference center overlooking the waterfront. As guests mingled between tables, Claire overheard a familiar name. Noah Brooks. Curious, she paused near a conversation between two event coordinators. He was incredible at the gala, one woman said. Completely different from what people expected. Another nodded. The way he spoke with donors was remarkable. Everyone left impressed. Claire frowned slightly. The comments felt strange. Noah had always been polite, but not particularly confident in large social settings. The description did not quite fit the man she knew. Later, while driving home, she found herself replaying the conversation. Different. The word lingered. It was the same word Charlotte had unknowingly planted during the gala. The same feeling Claire herself had begun experiencing at home. Different. That evening, she arrived to find Ethan sitting on the back porch reading a book. The setting sun cast golden light across the yard. For a moment, she simply watched him. He looked peaceful, comfortable, as though he carried no need to prove anything to anyone. Claire sat beside him. Ethan glanced up and smiled. How was the luncheon? She hesitated. Interesting. He nodded and returned to his book. Claire studied him carefully. The shape of his smile. The calmness in his voice. The way he listened before speaking. Suddenly a memory surfaced. Years ago, when they first met, Ethan had been exactly like this. Thoughtful. Attentive. Present. Somewhere along the way she had stopped noticing. But another realization followed immediately behind it. The qualities she had been admiring recently were not new at all. They had always been there. The only thing that had changed was her ability to see them. And for the first time, a question entered her mind that she could not explain. If Ethan had always been this man, what else had she completely missed? The question refused to leave Claire alone. It followed her through meetings, traffic lights, grocery store aisles, and sleepless nights. What else had she completely missed? The answer seemed dangerously close, yet somehow remained just beyond reach. 2 weeks after the charity luncheon, she found herself standing inside a downtown conference center preparing for another community fundraising event. The venue buzzed with activity. Volunteers arranged tables. Sponsors reviewed schedules. Event organizers moved quickly between conversations. Claire had attended countless functions like this over the years, usually without paying much attention to the people behind them. This time was different. While reviewing the program, she overheard 2 board members discussing Noah Brooks. Again. Ever since that gala, people cannot stop talking about him, one man said. It is like he became a completely different person overnight. The other laughed. Whatever happened, I hope it sticks. I have never seen donors respond that positively. Claire froze. The same phrase again. Different. She continued listening. His presentation was outstanding. The way he connected with people was incredible. He remembered everyone's names. Claire felt a strange sensation settle in her stomach. Those descriptions sounded familiar. Not because they reminded her of Noah, because they reminded her of Ethan. The thought lingered throughout the afternoon. By evening, curiosity had grown into something stronger. Concern. On the drive home, she began replaying recent events in her mind. Noah's sudden disappearance. Ethan's unexplained absences. The gala. The comments from Charlotte. The subtle shift in Ethan's confidence afterward. One memory surfaced above all the others. The night Ethan received Noah's final text message. Thank you for always seeing me, brother. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Something was wrong. When she arrived home, Ethan was not there. A note on the refrigerator explained that he had gone to help organize another fundraising event. Claire stared at the handwriting. Then, without fully understanding why, she walked upstairs toward the guest room. The room remained mostly unused except for storage. Inside one of the drawers, she found a stack of folders. Event schedules. Sponsor lists. Donor information. Every document carried Noah's name. Claire slowly sat on the edge of the bed. Her pulse quickened. Then she found the letter. Folded carefully between 2 folders. Noah's letter. Ethan had never intended for her to see it. Yet now it rested in her trembling hands. She read every word. Once. Then again. By the time she reached the final page, tears blurred her vision. The truth stood before her with startling clarity. Noah had left. Ethan had stepped into his place. Not for recognition. Not for praise. Simply because his brother needed him. Claire lowered the pages into her lap. For several minutes she could not move. Memory after memory flooded back. The fundraiser. The compliments. The confidence people suddenly saw in Noah. None of it had been Noah at all. It had been Ethan. The same Ethan she barely noticed at breakfast. The same Ethan who remembered her coffee order, repaired the fence, bought flowers for her mother, and filled notebooks with details about her life. The same Ethan she had spent years taking for granted. A car door closed outside. Claire looked through the window and saw Ethan pulling into the driveway. Her heart pounded. Moments later, she heard the front door open downstairs. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Slowly approaching. Claire stood. The letter remained clutched in her hands. For the first time in years, she was about to look directly at her husband and see him exactly as he had always been. And she already knew one thing with painful certainty. The man she thought she understood was someone she had never truly known at all. When Ethan stepped into the guest room, he stopped immediately. Claire stood near the window holding Noah's letter. The folded pages trembled slightly in her hands. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence carried none of the comfort that usually existed between them. This silence felt different. Heavy. Honest. Unavoidable. Ethan glanced at the letter and understood instantly. There was no point pretending. No point explaining how she found it. The truth had already arrived. Claire looked at him as though seeing him for the first time. Not the husband who made breakfast every morning. Not the man who quietly handled responsibilities in the background. Not the familiar figure she passed in hallways without a second thought. She was looking at him. Really looking at him. "You took his place," she said softly. Ethan nodded. For a little while. Claire laughed once, but there was no humor in it. A little while. She lowered her eyes. People spent weeks talking about how much Noah had changed. Ethan remained quiet. "That was you." Again, he nodded. The confession seemed almost insignificant to him. Yet to Claire, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle she should have solved years ago. Tears gathered in her eyes. "Why did you not tell me?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "Because it was never supposed to be about me." The answer broke something inside her. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was exactly what Ethan would say. Claire sat down slowly. Everyone noticed. Ethan frowned. "What?" "At the gala. At the meetings. At the charity events." Her voice shook. "They noticed your kindness. Your patience. Your ability to connect with people." She looked up at him. "Strangers saw your value in a few hours." The room fell silent. Claire's tears finally escaped. "I lived with you for years and somehow I missed it." Ethan immediately stepped closer. Instinctively. Concern replacing everything else. He handed her a tissue from the nearby desk. Even now, faced with her tears, his first reaction was to take care of her. Claire accepted it and looked away. "That is exactly what I mean." Ethan sat across from her. "Claire." She shook her head. "No." Her voice cracked. "Do not make this easier for me." Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. The sound filled the spaces between their words. Claire wiped her eyes. "I spent years believing you would always be there." Ethan listened quietly. "I stopped noticing the things you did because I assumed they would never stop." Another tear slid down her cheek. "And the worst part is that you never complained." Ethan stared at the floor for several seconds. "You had your own pressures. Your own responsibilities." Claire laughed bitterly. "Listen to yourself." He looked up. "What?" "I am sitting here admitting I failed you, and you are still trying to protect me from feeling bad." Ethan did not know how to answer. Because she was right. Even now, he was searching for ways to ease her guilt. Claire slowly unfolded Noah's letter again. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Ethan waited. The man everyone admired at those events was not pretending to be someone better. She looked directly into his eyes. He was simply being himself. The realization hung between them. Painful because it was true. For years Claire had searched for qualities she admired in other people. Confidence. Reliability. Compassion. Strength. She had never realized those qualities were already living under her own roof. Ethan rose and walked toward the door. Not because he was angry. Because he sensed she needed space. His hand reached the doorknob when Claire spoke again. "I am sorry." Ethan paused. The words were barely above a whisper. Yet they carried more weight than anything she had said in years. He turned slowly. Claire sat quietly by the window, tears drying on her cheeks. For the first time since they met, she was not looking through him. She was looking directly at him. And that simple difference changed everything. Spring arrived slowly that year. Rainstorms gave way to clear mornings. Cherry blossoms appeared along neighborhood streets. The world outside seemed to be changing, and somehow the Brooks household was changing with it. Not through grand gestures. Not through dramatic declarations. Through small moments that had been missing for years. One Saturday morning, Claire woke early and walked downstairs expecting to find Ethan already making breakfast. Instead, she found the kitchen empty. A note rested beside the coffee maker. "Helping Noah move into his new place. Back later." Claire stared at the handwriting for a long moment. Months earlier, she would have barely noticed. Now she found herself smiling. Noah had finally returned from Montana several weeks earlier. Healthier. Happier. More confident than anyone remembered. For the first time in years, he seemed at peace with himself. The brothers spent more time together now. Claire understood why. Ethan had never stopped believing in Noah, even when everyone else quietly gave up. Later that afternoon, Claire drove across town to deliver lunch to the brothers. She found them assembling furniture inside Noah's apartment. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. Tools were scattered across the floor. The scene was ordinary, yet something about it felt meaningful. Noah laughed as Ethan adjusted a crooked bookshelf. "You know," Noah said, "I leave town for a few weeks and suddenly everyone thinks I became charming." Ethan groaned. Claire laughed. Noah glanced between them. Then his expression softened. "For what it is worth, I am glad the truth came out." Ethan looked uncomfortable immediately. It was never a big deal. Noah shook his head. That is exactly why it mattered. Claire listened quietly. Years ago, she would have missed the meaning behind those words. Not anymore. That evening, the three of them shared dinner at a small waterfront restaurant. As the sun set over Elliott Bay, Noah eventually excused himself to take a phone call. Claire and Ethan remained alone at the table. The city lights reflected across the water. Boats drifted quietly in the distance. For a while, neither spoke. Then Claire reached across the table and gently took Ethan's hand. Such a simple gesture. Yet it carried years of unspoken understanding. Ethan looked surprised. Claire smiled softly. "I spent a long time looking for extraordinary things." Ethan remained silent. The whole time, the best thing in my life was sitting right in front of me. Emotion flickered across his face. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something gentler. Relief. Claire squeezed his hand. "I cannot change the years I spent taking you for granted." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Claire, let me finish." Her eyes glistened beneath the restaurant lights. "I cannot change the past, but I can choose what happens next." The words settled between them. Honest. Simple. Real. Across the restaurant, Noah watched through the window before quietly turning away to give them privacy. He smiled to himself. For years he had believed he was the invisible brother, the forgotten one. Yet somehow the greatest lesson had belonged to everyone else. Sometimes people do not lose what matters because it disappears. They lose it because they stop seeing it. As darkness settled over Seattle, Ethan and Claire walked slowly along the waterfront together. No audience. No dramatic speeches. No promises that life would suddenly become perfect. Just two people finally understanding each other again. The city lights shimmered across the bay. A cool breeze drifted through the evening air. And for the first time in a very long time, Claire was not looking past her husband. She was looking directly at him. Not as a habit. Not as a responsibility. Not as someone who would always be there. She was looking at him as the man he had been all along. And somehow, after all those years, that simple act of truly seeing him felt like the beginning of everything.